So I've mentioned user experience. What exactly do I mean? Because it kind of sounds like interaction design, right? User experience is pretty much looking at how a product behaves and is used by people in the real world. So user experience is something that is very much in industry. When you look at research, you're going to be talking more in terms of human-computer interaction. User experience, they're looking for someone who's been able to take an idea and translate it into a viable product, a product that they can use to go out and sell. So it's the way people feel about it and their pleasure and satisfaction when using it, looking at it, holding it, and opening or closing it. Sounds kind of fluffy, right? How many of you are Star Trek fans? There are not enough nerdy people in this class. This is terrible. I used to have more nerdy people. I love Star Trek, by the way. Yes, it's awesome. All right, so I was talking to a gentleman at one time who was doing some research with some handhelds, and he was doing research on how people tend to like to wake up their handhelds the most. And what he found was that most people, well, something happens, they just want it to wake up when they pick it up. Unless they were Trekkies, and they especially like the old Star Trek. What did they want? Flip it. So, who are you designing for? Your average person or someone who's a Trekkie? Could make a difference in how you design it. Why? Because for those of us who love Star Trek, what is our emotional connection to Star Trek? Yeah, it's like, oh my God, it's so awesome. I want to live during that time. Think that makes a difference in terms of what we want to use? It does. Now, some of you are thinking, God, Star Trek, why would I design something for that? Because Trekkies spend a lot of money, by the way, on Star Trek stuff. So you want to get just a signature from someone who was like a second place actor on Star Trek, $50. Yeah, I know it's painful, isn't it? How many of you have seen the Star Trek conventions on TV? Oh, you got, okay. You guys need to watch, there's a short film called Trekkers. You want to see Obsession? Yeah, watch that. No, I'm not that bad. You'll see how the emotion that people have, this connection, makes a big difference. Every product that is used by someone has a user experience. We're talking about it in terms of digital products, but even newspapers. How do you feel when you're sitting down and you're reading a newspaper? Kind of sitting back, you're opening it up, blocking out the rest of the world. That's a type of experience. There was one time, this was quite a number of years ago, where one of the major newspapers decided they wanted to change the format, make the newspaper a little smaller so it's easier to hold. What do you think their users said? Yeah, no. They didn't like it. It was a different user experience. Ketchup bottles. How many of you have used the old glass ketchup bottles? How do you get the ketchup out? That's right. You're pounding and pounding and pounding, and maybe you'll get one drop. Great user experience, right? Yeah, or the entire bottle. Now what do they have? Yeah, squeeze bottles. Now some will argue it doesn't taste as good in the plastic bottle as the glass bottle. That's a whole other discussion. But again, different user experiences, different designs. The one thing I want you to remember, though, is you cannot design a user experience. You can only design for a user experience. This is the user experience I want the individual to have. Here's the design I'm going to create to make it more likely they will be able to have that user experience. So let's talk about the iPod. Especially since we're talking about a lot of these fluffy things, right? Emotion, desire. Who remembers the original iPod commercials? Just a couple of you? Boy, I'm going to have to start showing a video of this. Usually everyone remembers. What do you remember about that commercial? They're out there dancing, they're going through the city, they're just hopping around, having a fabulous time, and you're like, I so want that life. That's what I want to do in my everyday life. That is the user experience they wanted people to have, or at least think they were going to have. And what do people think of their Apple products? They're great, they love them, right? They hold them, they pet them, they get arguments on the internet about that it's so much better than everything else. You'll find that Apple and the iPod did a fabulous, fabulous job when it came to designing for a quality user experience. They really did a great job of connecting with that emotional part of ourselves, about that experiential part of ourselves. Because, you know, when the iPod came out, were there other MP3 players out there? Yes, there were. iPod was not the first MP3 player. Was the iPod the most powerful MP3 player out there? No. Was it the least expensive? No. In fact, there were other iPod players out there. They had more features, they were more powerful, they had more storage, they were less expensive. And guess who blew them away? The iPod. Does anyone remember the name of any of those previous? Creative Labs, yeah, kind of like, kind of, sort of. Okay, are any of them still out there? The companies, yes, but the products, no. For most of them. I actually don't know because I have an iPod, hate to admit it. No, I don't worship Apple products, by the way, but I do like them. If you look at that success, they did a great job of harnessing user experience. Yes?
And there's another thing, I mean, about Apple. People usually, when you start buying an Apple product, then you want more from that same company. I mean,
yes.
it becomes a cult after that.
It's because they're designed to work together.
Yeah, they're designed to work very well together, and it does become a cult. But even if you're not in the cult, because once I got my iPad mini, I was told, you're in the cult now, and I'm like, no, I'm not. But they do work very well together. Now, there are, of course, other complaints. There are, especially IT people, there's some limitations that are rather annoying. But most people buying these products are more focused on this positive experience they get. Apple did a great job. And what you find is that other companies are trying to emulate that. Google has been trying to emulate that. They've been doing an okay job at it, better than most other companies. Microsoft is really trying to emulate it now. I think they just bought out, was it a Nokia? Where when they talk about it, they're really trying to emulate this model because it's worked. Whether they're successful or not, that we have to see. But user experience can make a substantial difference in how well people accept your product. So, again, we want to remember, to have a positive user experience, we need to talk to our users. We need to identify their needs, identify their desires. How do we go about doing that? Well, here's just a short list of the things that we're going to be talking about. You need to identify the needs and establish requirements for the user experience. What do they want to experience? You then want to be able to develop alternate designs, because our interpretation of what they want may not necessarily be theirs, or we may actually be able to come up with something that's going to even improve what they're thinking about. You then want to be able to build some interactive prototypes that you can use to test with your users. Because hands-on testing, as we'll talk about later in the semester, is very different from just saying, here, look at this and tell me what you think. And you want to evaluate what's being built throughout the design process. From the very beginning, don't wait till the end. Because if you wait to the end, you're just going to be putting a bunch of Band-Aids on things, trying to fix them. There are some core characteristics of interaction design. Again, users need to be involved throughout the design process. You need to use specific usability and user experience goals. They need to be identified, clearly documented, and agreed to at the beginning of the project. It's another thing you're going to hear from me continuously. The design needs to start early, and you need to be engaged in any changes throughout the design process. And it's going to be an iterative process. Do you guys know what an iterative process is? Some yes, some no. That's basically where you will go and you'll create a design. You will then test out that design, see what changes need to be made, and you make a change. You then go through that process again. You make that change, you test the design, see what needs to be changed, so on and so forth. Now, where it's incremental, if you look at industry, what they'll do is they will have very specific goals as to what they're going to look at for a particular product or a particular area for each of those increments. So you're basically building on these previous improvements. How many of you have heard of agile development, software development? You're going to learn more and more about it. There are a lot of companies that more and more often are using agile development. It's a type of project management. You guys have heard of project management? Yeah, so wherever you go to work, unless you're the single person working there, which is very unlikely, you're going to deal with project management. Agile is one of the ones that's becoming more and more popular that you're going to hear more about, where they have a lot of very rapid incremental development, anywhere from 2 weeks to 8 weeks, where you are now putting out a new release of a product. So they tend to be small changes that build upon each other. Now, I'm just going to go through this really quickly because we've actually talked about this. You know, why do we want to go through this length? Actually, I usually like to quiz you guys on this. Should I quiz you or go through it quickly? Go through it quickly. You don't want me to quiz you? Okay. You sure? All right. So it helps designers. It helps us know how to design interactive products better. It helps us appreciate that there is no one-size-fits-all, that we really have to look at what our specific users' needs are and who they are. We want to identify any incorrect assumptions we make, because some of the assumptions we make may not necessarily be what the types of assumptions or the manner in which our users are looking at things. And we want to be aware of people's sensitivities and capabilities. Remember my story about the big buttoned remote? Yes, learn from my mistakes. I will never forget that. So here's another question for you. See how much you've been paying attention. Cultural differences. Do you think they matter? Oh, yes. All right. You are now designing an interface that's going to be used worldwide. And you have to include dates as a calendar. Which of those are you going to use? Some say second, some say words, some say none. What would be the best approach? Write it out. Why? Because when we look at this, 52160 or 21560, it's pretty obvious what's the month and what's the day, right? What if it was, May 5th or May 6th? Which is it? Good question. So you'll find that more and more international websites will actually write out the month. Now, of course, this also means you have to figure out what language the person is using. So the coding is more complex, but it's a better user experience. We already talked about the iPod, so I'm going to skip that and jump to another example. Hannah, our IKEA online sales agent. Notice there are two different versions. It just so happens that one of these is for Americans and one of these is for the UK. Who wants to guess which is which? Okay, who thinks that this one is for the US? Who thinks that this one is for the UK? Wow, we are split about half-half. You want me to give you the answer?
Center. Yeah, I think center, the word, center.
Okay, yeah.
The one on the left is for the.
Oh, you just noticed that, huh? That actually brings me to a really nice point that we're going to talk more about later in the semester. When we're looking at this, what did you look at first? You looked at the pictures, and you looked at how much text there was. It just so happens that this is the British, this is the American. But most of you did not actually read that title. How common do you think that is? Very common. We tend not to like to read. We want to glance at it and immediately find what we know. We tend to skim things. Why? Because the way we work as humans is we are trying to focus on our goals. Remember we talked about that? We want to try to be able to figure out the information, pull the information that we need as quickly as possible. So it's really important that you think about it in your design when you're trying to get someone's attention, or even when you're doing an error message.